The night sky over Konoha was stained with the violent roar of the nine tails, its massive form casting a shadow over the village below. The air was thick with tension as villagers fled in fear, their minds consumed by the terror that the monstrous beast brought. Hokage Minato Namikaze and his wife, Kushina Uzumaki, stood together in the heart of the village, their eyes resolute, yet filled with sorrow. Their newborn son, Naruto, lay in the arms of a nurse, his small face blissfully unaware of the fate that awaited him. Minato clenched his fists, knowing that the village's future, and the life of his son, hinged on this moment. The Nine Tails, a beast that had terrorized villages for centuries, was rampaging, causing chaos and destruction. But Minato was prepared. His decision, made with the gravest of consequences, had already been set into motion. "I will seal the Nine Tails chakra within Naruto," Minato said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "But there's more that must be done, Kushina. I can't just seal away the beast's power. There's something else we need to do. Something beyond this." Kushina, weary and exhausted from childbirth, nodded. Her eyes met Minato's with a mix of concern and acceptance. She understood what he was implying. Minato's eyes turned toward the ancient scrolls that lay in his study, containing the knowledge of jutsu older than the village itself. He had long suspected that something far darker than just the Nine Tails had been tied to Naruto's birth. An alien force, something ancient and devastating, an entity that existed far beyond the scope of human understanding, had made its way into their world. He had never dared to speak of it, but the seal he had created, one forged through his own desperate efforts, had not only bound the Nine Tails but also imprisoned this foreign presence within his son's body. It was FRIEZA, a being of unimaginable cruelty, whose very essence had slipped through the cracks of time and space, weaving itself into Naruto's being as he was born. Minato's hand shook as he prepared the final seal. He would not only protect Konoha from the Nine Tails' wrath, but he would bind the cold, merciless power of FRIEZA within his son, an act that, though necessary, would alter the course of Naruto's life forever. As the Reaper's death seal began to take form, Minato turned to Kushina one last time, his gaze filled with an unspeakable sorrow. "Kushina, we've sealed the Nine Tails within Naruto's body, but we also sealed FRIEZA's essence. Naruto, he is no ordinary child. The power coursing through him is unlike anything we've seen. It's a gift, but also a curse. He will be both a god and a monster." Kushina's breath hitched as she looked at her newborn son, unaware of the dark presence that had now taken residence within him. "Is he going to be okay?" she whispered. Minato hesitated, his mind racing. "He will survive. But we will need to make the world believe that the Nine Tails is the only force within him. It's the only way he'll be able to grow without suffering the consequences of FRIEZA's nature. The villagers, they'll never know what's truly inside him." The Reaper death seal was complete. A moment of silence filled the room as the immense power of the Nine Tails and FRIEZA's essence were locked away. But as the forces began to merge, a surge of malevolent energy broke free from Naruto's tiny form. The power was suppressed, but it was there, watchful, patient, and infinitely cruel. The years that followed were quiet, yet the village's atmosphere was poisoned by an undercurrent of suspicion. The villagers' whispers grew louder with each passing day, as Naruto's fate was sealed not just by the seal of the Nine Tails, but by the power within him. They viewed him as the embodiment of the beast's wrath, a living symbol of their suffering. What they didn't know was that Naruto's true nature was far darker and more dangerous than the Nine Tails itself. Naruto's childhood was marked by neglect and isolation. His parents, though still present in his life, were often distant, too preoccupied with the burdens of the village to notice the growing darkness within him. Minato and Kushina, though well-meaning, were too focused on protecting Naruto from the villagers' hate to see the toll the power within him was taking. They couldn't understand what FRIEZA's essence was doing to their son, how it was shaping him into something terrifying. Naruto, growing up in the shadows of his parents' distant love, quickly learned that the world was a cruel and unforgiving place. The villagers' harsh treatment only reinforced the belief that he was different. He was cursed. He was nothing but a weapon, a monster that needed to be controlled. But Naruto never allowed their rejection to break him. Instead, it made him stronger. He could feel it, deep within the core of his being. The power of FRIEZA's essence, cold, calculating, and unyielding, coursed through him like a poison. It twisted his emotions, feeding his anger and his desire for revenge. He could hear FRIEZA's voice in his head, whispering words of superiority, teaching him to see the world as weak and insignificant. "You're a god among insects, Naruto. This world is beneath you," FRIEZA's voice would say. "Embrace your power. Crush everything that dares to stand in your way." For years, Naruto had kept his true nature hidden, not understanding the full extent of his power. But as he grew, so too did his understanding of what he was capable of. The villagers feared the Nine-Tails chakra, but they had no idea that the power within Naruto was far more dangerous. He was not just the vessel of the Nine-Tails, he was the heir to an unimaginable force, a being that could bend the world to his will. It wasn't long before Naruto began to realize the full scope of the power within him. The first sign came when he was just 8 years old. During a simple confrontation with a group of bullies, something inside him snapped. The villagers had taunted him again, calling him a monster, a demon. His anger boiled over, and for the first time, he unleashed the full force of FRIEZA's power. A wave of cold energy exploded from his body, knocking the bullies back with a force that shattered the ground beneath them. His eyes turned a bright, icy blue, and his body surged with strength beyond anything he had ever felt before. In that moment, he knew that nothing could stop him. Not the villagers, not the Hokage, not even the Nine-Tails itself. FRIEZA's essence took root in his heart, shaping his soul with a single, unrelenting truth: he was a god. From that day forward, Naruto's demeanor began to change. He no longer sought the approval of others, nor did he care for the love that his parents offered. His only focus was on power growing stronger, learning to control the alien force inside him, and exacting his revenge on the world that had turned its back on him. But the power within him was not without its consequences. As he embraced FRIEZA's essence more fully, his heart grew colder. Compassion, love, and kindness became foreign concepts. He saw others as beneath him, tools to be used or discarded at his will. His desire to prove his superiority drove him to seek out challenges, each one reinforcing his belief that the world was his to dominate. With each victory, Naruto's presence became more intimidating. The villagers began to whisper about his power, fearful of the dark energy that seemed to radiate from him. Some believed he was the true vessel of the Nine-Tails, others feared he was something far worse, a godlike entity that could destroy them all with a thought. Minato and Kushina watched their son from a distance, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they had inadvertently unleashed a force far greater than they had ever imagined. The child they had hoped would bring peace to the world was now on a path toward destruction. They couldn't help him. They were powerless to stop him. As Naruto's power grew, so did his ambition. No longer content with the title of outcast or monster, he began to see himself as the ruler of all. His very presence was enough to crush the wills of those around him. He could feel the fear that radiated from the villagers when he walked through the streets. It was intoxicating. Every move he made was calculated, every decision aimed at one goal: absolute power. He was no longer just Naruto Uzumaki. He was a god, a being beyond the reach of any mortal. And he would make the world bow before him. The first step in his conquest came when he turned his gaze on the village itself. Konoha, the place that had abandoned him, was nothing more than a stepping stone on his journey to godhood. Using his immense strength and FRIEZA's power, Naruto obliterated anyone who dared stand in his way. The village trembled before him, its leaders powerless to stop the boy they had once shunned. Minato, Kushina, and the other Hokage could only watch as Naruto's reign of terror began. There was no escaping the wrath of a god. And so, the world would learn, Naruto Uzumaki was unstoppable. He was a king, and the world would kneel at his feet. The sun had barely risen over Konoha when a group of 5-year-old children gathered in the village square, eyes fixed on a lone figure standing in the center. Naruto Uzumaki, the boy that everyone feared and despised, stood motionless, his bright blue eyes cold and distant, observing the world with an unsettling calm. His small, fragile form was an illusion. Beneath it lay a reservoir of unimaginable power. The essence of FRIEZA, dormant yet pulsing with malignant energy, throbbed within his very core. It made him stronger than any child his age, faster, and far more resilient. But it was the darkness within him, the cruelty, the indifference to human life that set him apart. To the children around him, Naruto was nothing more than a symbol of what they feared most, a living demon that had been cursed upon them by fate. "Look at the demon, guys," one of the children whispered, his voice dripping with disgust. "He's the one who killed the 4th Hokage. His blood's probably cursed, too." The group of children snickered, their voices high-pitched with laughter. But their words, their mockery, had no effect on Naruto. He could feel their hate, their fear, their petty desires to mock him. It was nothing more than noise to him, a distraction. And yet, it was a reminder of just how weak they were. Naruto had always been alone. He had no friends, no allies. The villagers hated him, treated him as if he were the very incarnation of the Nine Tails itself, and that, for him, was just fine. He had no need for their love or approval. In fact, the more they feared him, the more it pleased him. The only thing he craved was power, and he could already feel the immense strength coursing through his veins. The children continued to taunt him, poking fun at his untamed blonde hair and his ragged clothes. "Why don't you go away, demon? No one wants you here," one boy spat, his voice laced with venom. Naruto's lips twitched into a cruel smile, his eyes narrowing as his body tensed with a quiet, deadly energy. They had no idea how much power he truly possessed. But they would soon learn. Without warning, he extended his hand toward them, and a wave of cold energy erupted from his body. It crackled in the air like electricity, the sheer force sending a shiver through the surrounding children as they froze in place. The boy who had spoken first looked up, his eyes wide with terror, but it was already too late. In an instant, Naruto had closed the distance between them. His speed was inhuman, an unnatural blur that left the others struggling to react. His hand shot out, grabbing the boy by the collar and lifting him into the air as if he weighed nothing at all. "You think I care about your words, little insect?" Naruto's voice was cold, devoid of emotion. It was as if he were speaking to a pet that had misbehaved, rather than a child he had just terrified. The boy's face turned pale, his body trembling in Naruto's unyielding grip. "You don't matter. None of you matter." He tossed the boy aside, sending him crashing into the dirt with a thud. The other children gasped, too frightened to move. They could feel the raw power radiating off of him, the aura of malice that filled the air. They'd never seen a child this strong before. They'd never seen anyone this terrifying. Naruto's eyes flicked over them, observing their expressions of fear and awe. The sight pleased him. Their terror was exactly what he wanted. "I don't need mercy," Naruto muttered to himself, his voice almost a whisper, though it rang with a chilling certainty. "Mercy is for the weak. You're all weak." A brief flicker of something dark and dangerous passed across his mind. He could destroy them all, obliterate them with the thought. But that would be too easy. For now, they could serve a purpose. He would teach them to fear him, to recognize his power. That was all that mattered. He took a step back, and the air around him seemed to grow colder. The children were too scared to say anything, too scared to move. Naruto's lips curled into a smirk. "Get lost," he commanded, his tone final. Without another word, the children scrambled to their feet, not daring to look back. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them, their terrified cries echoing through the empty street. Naruto stood still, watching them flee, the rush of power still coursing through him. For a moment, he considered using more of FRIEZA's energy, perhaps wiping them out entirely. They would never learn, not unless he made them. But something in his mind stayed his hand. For now, they were no threat. He was a god. And gods didn't waste their power on insignificant creatures. The days that followed were uneventful, but Naruto's power continued to grow. At the age of 5, he had already surpassed many of the adults in the village in terms of raw strength and speed. His body, though small and frail in appearance, was capable of withstanding incredible amounts of physical punishment. He could endure far more than any ordinary child, and his senses were sharpened to an unnatural degree. But the most dangerous thing about him was the coldness that had settled in his heart. The villagers saw his display of power as the actions of a monster. They were too afraid to approach him, too terrified to acknowledge him in any way. Most avoided him, some even crossing to the other side of the street when they saw him coming. It was exactly as he had wanted. They were afraid, and that fear would keep them in line. Naruto's parents Minato and Kushina watched from afar, unable to fully comprehend what was happening to their son. They had long believed that the Nine-Tails chakra, bound to Naruto's body, was the source of his unnatural abilities. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't understand, was that it wasn't just the Nine-Tails. There was another presence in Naruto, one far darker and more dangerous, FRIEZA's essence. As Naruto grew, so did the influence of this power. His personality began to shift, becoming colder and more calculating. His interactions with others were few and far between, and when they did occur, they were often filled with condescension and disdain. He didn't need friends. He didn't need family. What he needed was control, and he would have it. One afternoon, Naruto's path crossed with a group of older children. They had been talking amongst themselves, unaware of his presence, but when they noticed him, they immediately began laughing. "Hey, it's the demon. What's the matter, Uzumaki? Did the Nine-Tails forget to give you a good beating?" Naruto's eyes narrowed, a flicker of cold energy seeping from his body. The words were like a thorn in his side, and he could feel his anger beginning to rise. But unlike the other children, these weren't afraid of him. They saw him as an easy target, a freak to be mocked. They didn't understand the darkness that lay within him. Without a word, Naruto stepped forward, his body moving faster than the eye could follow. In a blur, he was in front of the largest boy, his hand snapping out to grasp the boy's wrist. The child struggled, trying to free himself, but Naruto's grip was unyielding. "You should learn to be more careful with your words," Naruto said softly, his voice chillingly calm. "You never know who you're talking to." His fingers dug into the boy's arm, sending a jolt of pain through his body. The boy cried out in agony, but Naruto merely stared at him, his gaze void of empathy. "I don't tolerate disrespect," Naruto whispered, his eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. A small burst of FRIEZA's energy erupted from his body, crackling with power. It wasn't enough to kill, but it was enough to make the boy understand. The child fell to his knees, gasping for air, his face twisted in pain. Naruto stood over him, watching him suffer for a moment longer before releasing his grip and stepping back. "Next time, think before you speak," Naruto warned, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy didn't move for a long time, his body trembling with fear and pain. Naruto turned and walked away, his heart as cold as the power that flowed through him. Mercy was a weakness. And as long as he walked this earth, he would have no use for it. The day Naruto's true power was unleashed was like any other, quiet, almost mundane, save for the hatred that the villagers cast upon him. At the age of 6, Naruto had already become accustomed to the whispers behind his back, the cold stares, and the hushed conversations that followed him wherever he went. His small frame was a sharp contrast to the storm of darkness raging within him. He had already learned that mercy was for the weak. That power was the only language people understood. And in his heart, the essence of FRIEZA, the alien tyrant sealed within him at birth, stirred, waiting for the moment to break free. That moment came on a day when the sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows over the village. A group of children, led by the same boy who had mocked him the previous year, approached Naruto once again. They had grown bolder as time passed, their hatred more pronounced, but this time, their words were sharper, their intentions darker. "Hey, demon," one of the boys sneered. "Still thinking you're better than everyone else? How about we teach you a lesson this time?" Naruto's gaze flicked over them, his expression unchanged. The usual fear and disgust radiated off the children, but for some reason, today was different. They weren't just mocking him, they were testing him. This wasn't just about humiliating him anymore. This was a challenge. He didn't flinch. He didn't respond. In fact, he barely even acknowledged them. The boy who had spoken first stepped forward, his eyes filled with cruel intent. "What's wrong, Uzumaki? Too scared to fight back?" Naruto's lips curled into a slight, cold smile. They had no idea how little they mattered. How insignificant they were in his eyes. They weren't worthy of his time, but they had already crossed the line. And now, they would learn what happens to those who dared to challenge him. Without warning, Naruto's body rippled with power, a surge of cold energy radiating outward. His small frame began to tremble with an energy far beyond what any child his age should possess. His heart beat slowly, deliberately, as FRIEZA's influence stirred within him, whispering words of destruction and dominance. The ground beneath his feet seemed to crack under the weight of his power, but it was nothing compared to the chaos that was about to unfold. He didn't even need to think. It just happened. A pulse of energy shot from Naruto's hand, and in an instant, the alleyway around him was engulfed in a violent explosion. The force of the blast ripped through the walls, splintering wood and stone like paper, sending debris flying through the air in every direction. The children screamed, their bodies thrown backward, crashing into buildings and falling into the street. Naruto stood in the center of the destruction, his eyes glowing a fierce, unnatural blue. His hair, wild and untamed, whipped around in the violent winds of the explosion, but he was unaffected. He was untouched. In the wake of the blast, nothing but rubble and smoke remained. The world around him was silent for a moment. It felt as if time had stopped, the air thick with the aftermath of his unbridled power. Then, a cough. A whimper. Naruto's eyes slowly flicked to the remains of the children. They were scattered around, their bodies mangled, their faces pale with fear. One boy, the leader of the group, crawled weakly toward him, gasping for breath. What are you?" the boy stammered, his voice shaking with terror. Naruto's lips parted into a smirk, though it was more a twisted smile than anything resembling joy. He looked down at the boy with cold, empty eyes, as if the child's life meant less than a speck of dust. "You should never have challenged me," Naruto murmured, his voice barely audible amidst the chaos. His hand raised once more, this time a ball of frigid energy swirling at his palm. The boy's eyes widened as he realized what was about to happen. But Naruto wasn't interested in killing him. Not yet. The fear in his eyes, the terror of knowing he was at Naruto's mercy, that was enough for now. He lowered his hand, and the energy dissipated, the boy spared for the moment. But the message was clear. He was weak. All of them were weak. "You all are nothing," Naruto said, his voice a calm, almost bored monotone. "I could have killed you. I could have destroyed everything in this village without a second thought. But you're not worth my time." With that, he turned his back on the group of children, who were too terrified to move. He walked away, leaving them behind, his mind already calculating the next move in his rise to power. The villagers arrived shortly after, drawn by the explosion and the screams. They found the remnants of the alleyway, a twisted landscape of collapsed buildings and shattered stone, but no bodies. The children had fled surviving, but broken. They were left in a state of shock, their minds struggling to comprehend the destruction they had witnessed. Naruto's display of power had been far beyond anything the village had ever seen. The air still crackled with residual energy, the very ground beneath their feet still trembling with the force of his blast. Some tried to approach, but the fear that had gripped them was all-consuming. This wasn't just the Nine-Tails chakra at work. This was something far darker. This was something none of them could possibly understand. And yet, none of them would dare to speak out. The children, now hidden in their homes, knew what had happened. They knew that Naruto was different. That he was dangerous. And they knew, deep down, that they were powerless to stop him. Naruto's power had been awakened in full. It was no longer something he could control, it was a force that had its own will. And now, he understood what he was capable of. He understood that no one could stop him. The villagers, the shinobi, the entire world, nothing mattered. They were ants beneath his feet, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And in that moment, Naruto embraced the truth. He wasn't just the son of the fourth Hokage. He wasn't the child of prophecy. He wasn't even a boy anymore. He was a god. The days that followed were filled with whispers, fear, and uncertainty. But for Naruto, they were filled with something far more intoxicating: power. He could feel it growing inside of him, the dark influence of FRIEZA whispering promises of destruction and conquest. It urged him to take more, to push the limits of his abilities. To crush anyone who stood in his way. Naruto didn't hesitate. He began to train, to hone his powers. He wasn't like the other children, whose strength came from their chakra. He had something more, an inherent darkness that made chakra feel like a mere trinket in comparison. As the days turned into weeks, Naruto's cruelty and indifference to life only deepened. He learned that the world was his for the taking. No one could oppose him. No one could match his strength. And soon, the entire village would learn that Naruto Uzumaki was not just a boy with a dark past. He was a force of nature, a being who would stop at nothing to claim the world as his own. He was unstoppable. At the age of 7, Naruto was no longer the boy who merely walked through the streets with a defiant glare. He had grown into something more, a being who saw the world as his domain, one where weakness had no place. His power was something he no longer had to hide. It was something that pulsed through him, ready to burst forth at a moment's notice. And with each passing day, it grew stronger. The village of Konoha, with all its shinobi and citizens, had come to fear him. His presence alone was enough to make the most seasoned warriors uneasy. Whispers spread, tales of the boy with the cursed blood and the godlike strength. His explosive temper and ruthless nature became the stuff of nightmares. But none dared speak of it aloud. One day, as Naruto wandered near the outskirts of the village, something unusual happened. A group of rogue ninjas, criminals from outside the village, spotted him. They were well aware of the boy's reputation and the power he carried within him. But to them, he was just a child, a vulnerable target, someone they could capture for leverage or use as a bargaining chip in their shady dealings. They moved quickly, surrounding him on all sides, their kunai and weapons drawn. But Naruto barely spared them a glance. His eyes, cold and calculating, watched as they closed in on him. His heart didn't race. His body didn't tense. He was beyond fear, beyond anything these rogue ninja could do. The leader of the group sneered at him, the arrogance of a man who thought he had the upper hand. "What do you think you're doing, kid? We're taking you with us. Stay out of this, and we won't hurt you." Naruto's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The rogue ninja laughed at him, underestimating the child, as so many had before. They moved in unison, trying to subdue him with force. But they were already too late. By the time they even made their first step, Naruto's hand was raised, his eyes now glowing with an unnatural blue light. The energy surged through him without effort. He'd grown accustomed to it, felt it move through his veins like liquid fire. It didn't take much to amplify the blast, just a thought, a slight flick of his wrist. The air around him began to distort as the raw power of FRIEZA's essence began to surge forth, filling the space. A burst of energy exploded from his palm, a wave of destruction that shot forward like an unstoppable force. The ground cracked beneath the blast, and in an instant, the rogue ninja were obliterated. There was no struggle, no resistance. Their bodies were torn apart by the sheer force of the blast. Flesh, bone, and weaponry were shattered and scattered across the landscape in the blink of an eye. Naruto watched, impassive, as the smoke cleared. The band of rogue ninjas was gone, reduced to nothing more than dust and blood-stained earth. There were no screams, no pleas for mercy. Just silence, broken only by the crackling of the residual energy still hanging in the air. Naruto felt a thrill rush through him, a dark, intoxicating satisfaction. For the first time in his life, he realized the true weight of his power. He could end lives without a second thought. He didn't need to hesitate. He didn't even need to feel anything. Their deaths were insignificant to him, as irrelevant as the bugs he once crushed beneath his feet. But this was different. The power to kill, it was exhilarating. The fear in their eyes, the shock of their last moments, this was what he had been craving all along. He stood there for a moment, staring at the aftermath. The remains of the ninja were scattered, their weapons still lying in the dirt, but Naruto didn't care. The village would never know the details of what happened here. No one had seen him do it. He was a god now, and his actions would be his alone to decide. Back in Konoha, rumors began to circulate quickly about the violent incident. The rogue ninjas had been found dead, their bodies unrecognizable, as though they'd been caught in a powerful storm or explosion. But no one could make sense of it. No one dared to say anything, especially not after the previous incidents. Naruto had always been an enigma to the villagers. They knew he was the son of the fourth Hokage, but his existence was a constant reminder of their fear. The Nine Tails had taken so much from the village. And now, Naruto, whose power was beyond anything they could understand, was a growing threat. But no one knew how to confront it. No one knew how to deal with the boy who was no longer a child but something else entirely. They kept their distance. They avoided him. And those who dared to venture too close found themselves in the midst of a nightmare. Naruto's power continued to grow, and with it, so did his ego. He began to see the villagers not as people but as ants beneath his feet. They were fragile, weak, and beneath his notice. They existed only to serve him, to bend to his will, to fear him. He had already decided that he would roll over them all, and there was no one strong enough to stop him. As he grew older, he made his presence felt throughout Konoha. He didn't seek approval from the villagers. He didn't care for their pity or their empty gestures of kindness. All he wanted was power. Power to bend the world to his will. Power to make everyone bow before him. And so, he continued his path of destruction and dominance, showing no mercy. Each kill, each act of violence, only served to solidify his belief that no one was his equal. No one could even touch him. And the more he killed, the stronger he became, driven by the cold, unfeeling essence of FRIEZA that had been sealed within him since birth. The village of Konoha would soon come to understand the reality of their situation. Naruto Uzumaki was not a hero. He was not a savior. He was a god, and they were his subjects. And under his rule, they would learn that survival meant submission. The only question that remained was who would dare stand against him and how long they would last. Naruto's every move became calculated, his every step more deliberate. No longer was he the boy who craved attention. He didn't need their recognition. The fear in their eyes was enough. The terror he instilled was all he required. As his control over his powers deepened, so did the realization that no one could match him. He could tear through entire battalions of shinobi in seconds. He could destroy villages without breaking a sweat. He could level mountains with a thought. And yet, it was not enough. He wanted more. He needed to prove that he was truly untouchable. That nothing in this world or any other could challenge his superiority. He would make them all bow. The path of destruction was just the beginning. As Naruto entered his 9th year, the world around him became little more than a stage, a place for him to display his superiority and test the limits of his power. He had long since shed any desire for friendship, companionship, or even approval. The people of Konoha were nothing to him but insects, and he, the mighty god, could crush them with the flick of his wrist. He was unstoppable, and as his abilities grew, so did his cruelty. At the age of 9, Naruto had already eclipsed the skills of most adult shinobi. His FRIEZA-derived powers were a part of him now, as natural as breathing. His ability to manipulate energy, his speed, his strength, all of it made him an unchallenged force. And while others feared him, few dared to confront him, for no one could match his overwhelming might. When Naruto wasn't obliterating buildings or terrorizing the academy, he spent his time toying with the villagers. No longer did he see them as people with emotions, desires, or worth. They were mere playthings, creatures to bend to his will, to suffer under his reign. He would humiliate them, break their spirits, and if they resisted, if they ever dared to defy him, he would kill them without hesitation. It started small, like most of his sadistic games. A slight, a word out of place, or a look that irritated him. And then it escalated. One day, as he walked through the village, he spotted a woman who had once whispered about him to her friends. Her eyes met his, and Naruto could see the fear she was trying to hide. It excited him. A cruel grin spread across his face, and he casually raised his hand. A pulse of energy erupted from his palm, sending the woman flying backward into a nearby wall. The force was so intense that the bricks cracked upon impact, and the woman's body crumpled as though a ragdoll had been thrown. The villagers stared in silence, knowing better than to intervene. No one would dare challenge him. No one would speak against him. Make sure you learn your place, Naruto muttered to himself as he walked away, leaving the woman to die in the ruins of the building. She had been nothing more than an ant under his boot, and now, she was gone. Her death was not a loss, it was a reminder that there was no one who could stop him. Naruto's cruelty did not end with adults. Children, too, became his pawns. There was no innocence in his eyes when he looked at them, only a calculating gaze that saw opportunities for manipulation, control, and amusement. He didn't need friends, he needed subjugation. Every child he encountered was either made to fear him or forced into servitude. The academy was a particular playground for him. While other children struggled to learn their basic ninjutsu and genjutsu, Naruto excelled with ease. He had surpassed most of the academy's instructors by the age of 10, but his lessons were no longer about technique, they were about power. He no longer cared for the curriculum. His training came directly from the essence of FRIEZA, the manipulation of energy, the destruction of all things in his path. The other students were nothing but stepping stones on his way to dominance. When he walked through the academy halls, his presence alone struck terror in his peers. His eyes, cold and unfeeling, would lock onto someone, and that person would know. They would know that their life meant nothing, that they existed only to serve him or suffer. There was one child, a boy named Yuri, who thought himself bold enough to stand up to Naruto. Yuri was quick with words, always talking about honor, about friendship, about the ideals of a shinobi. But those ideals meant nothing to Naruto. To him, they were just another weakness, another reason to destroy. One day, During a break in the academy's training session, Yori approached Naruto, his fists clenched and his chin lifted in defiance. "Why don't you stop terrorizing the village, Naruto?" Yori said, his voice trembling despite his bravado. "You think you're above everyone, but you're just a child one who's too scared to even act like a real shinobi." The others in the room tensed, waiting for what would happen next. The room seemed to hold its breath, the tension palpable. Naruto didn't flinch, didn't move an inch. He simply stared at Yori, his gaze unblinking. "You really don't understand, do you?" he said coldly. Then, without warning, he raised his hand and fired a blast of energy directly at Yori. The force of the blast sent Yori flying backward, crashing into the academy wall, leaving a large crater in the stone. The other students gasped. Yori was barely conscious, blood trickling from his mouth, his body limp. Naruto stood over him, his expression indifferent. "I don't need your approval," Naruto said, his voice carrying over the stunned silence. "You think I'm afraid of your ideals? Your honor? All of it is meaningless. You're all just tools. And tools are meant to be used." Yori's life was spared, but only because Naruto wasn't finished making his point. He grabbed Yori by the collar and lifted him to his feet, staring into his terrified eyes. "You see, Yori," Naruto continued, "there's no such thing as mercy in my world. You live only to serve me, or you die. And right now, you're lucky. If I decide you're useful, maybe I'll let you live to see another day." With that, he tossed Yori aside like a rag doll, leaving him crumpled on the ground, too scared to move. From that day forward, Yori was never the same. He knew where his place was now, and it was beneath Naruto's heel. Naruto's world continued to revolve around domination and destruction. He no longer saw the villagers as people but as resources to be used or discarded. The academy became his kingdom, and the children were his subjects, serving either through fear or submission. And with each passing day, his power grew. He could no longer imagine a life where he wasn't the center of everything. He was a god, and the world bent to his will. The village tried to fight back in small ways, patrols of Anbu, hidden shinobi ready to take action, but it was pointless. Naruto was untouchable. He knew the limits of his strength, and he knew no one could challenge him. But as his power swelled, so did his thirst for conquest. The village of Konoha was only the beginning. He had bigger plans now. He wasn't content with ruling just this small piece of the world. He would crush the other hidden villages and bring them under his control. Every shinobi, every warrior, every kingdom, none would be spared from his wrath. And when the time was right, he would make his move. But until then, Naruto continued to amuse himself with the helplessness of those around him. Every broken body, every terrified face, every crushed hope, these were all pieces of his growing empire. The world had yet to understand what it was up against. But it would soon learn. The Chunin exam was meant to be a challenge. It was supposed to test the skill, bravery, and tenacity of the young shinobi. For most, it was a rite of passage, a proving ground where they could rise to the next level. But for Naruto, the event was little more than a formality. He didn't care about the promotion. He didn't care about recognition. The only thing that mattered to him was proving, yet again, that he was untouchable, that no one could challenge him. By the time the Chunin exam began, Naruto had long outgrown the need for traditional training. His power, drawn from FRIEZA's essence, had already made him the strongest child in Konoha. His mastery over energy and combat was unparalleled, and his godlike arrogance fueled his every move. The villagers watched with growing fear, knowing that the Chunin exam would only cement his position as the most dangerous force in the land. The first round of the exam was a written test, but Naruto found it laughable. He wasn't interested in the questions, the answers, or the rules. With a flick of his wrist, he dispatched his opponents in the testing room, using his raw power to overwhelm them, effectively rendering the entire round meaningless. No one dared to oppose him, and no one was foolish enough to challenge his dominance. It was just a show for the other participants. Naruto wasn't here for the title, he was here to amuse himself and make a mockery of the system. But the real test came when the participants were sent to the forest of death. The air was thick with tension as the teams were dropped into the wild, given a task to collect opposing teams' scrolls and make it to the center. It was a bloodbath waiting to happen, and for most, survival was a matter of skill, strategy, and teamwork. But for Naruto, there was no need for strategy. There was only destruction. The dense forest echoed with the sounds of screams and the crackling of leaves underfoot. Teens, trying to survive and achieve their goals, moved cautiously through the ominous terrain. Naruto, however, walked with no such caution. He had no interest in sneaking around, nor did he care for avoiding conflict. He wanted to fight, to crush, to assert his superiority. As Naruto and his team moved deeper into the forest, they came across the first of the other teams. They were a group of 3, each of them experienced shinobi. They stood their ground when they saw Naruto approaching, clearly hoping to intimidate him. They were fools. Naruto's eyes glinted with amusement. Without a word, he raised his hand and released a blast of energy. The forest around him trembled as the shockwave of his attack tore through the trees, leveling everything in its path. The 3 shinobi didn't even have time to scream before the energy engulfed them. By the time the dust settled, there was nothing left of them, just scorched earth and smoldering remains. His team watched, silent and wide-eyed. They had seen Naruto's power before, but nothing like this. It was as if he had erased their existence with a single gesture. "You should learn to stay out of my way," Naruto muttered, turning his back to the destruction he'd left behind. The bodies of the fallen had been reduced to nothing more than ash, their names forgotten in the wake of his unstoppable power. But Naruto wasn't finished. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to annihilate everything in his path. As the days went on, the bodies continued to pile up. Team after team fell before Naruto's overwhelming might. Some tried to fight back, but it was pointless. They didn't understand the true extent of his power. A handful of energy blasts was enough to decimate entire squads. The air in the forest of death was thick with the smell of blood and burned flesh, and Naruto reveled in it. He relished the screams, the terror, the helplessness. It only made him stronger. Then, as the final rounds of the Chunin exam approached, Naruto found himself facing 2 of the most notable challengers, Neji Hyuga and Kiba Inyazuka. Neji, the prodigy of the Hyuga clan, had a reputation for his Byakugan and his incredible skill with the gentle fist style. Kiba, with his ferocity and teamwork with his dog Akamaru, was a force to be reckoned with. Both were formidable in their own right, but against Naruto, they were nothing. They were children playing at war. The fight began as they tried to coordinate their movements, Neji attempting to predict Naruto's every move with his Byakugan, and Kiba charging in with Akamaru. But Naruto was faster, more lethal, and far more powerful than either of them could have imagined. Neji attacked first, darting forward with blinding speed, attempting to land a blow to Naruto's pressure points with his gentle fist. But Naruto wasn't interested in defensive tactics. With a single flick of his hand, he released an energy blast, catching Neji mid-charge. The blast sent him flying backward, his body skidding along the ground before slamming into a tree. Neji groaned in pain, but Naruto wasn't done. He approached slowly, almost casually, as Neji tried to rise, his body barely responding. "You should have stayed out of my way," Naruto said with a smirk, his voice cold and unfeeling. Before Neji could react, Naruto raised his hand again, this time releasing a concentrated beam of energy directly at Neji's chest. The force of the blast caused Neji's body to disintegrate on impact, reducing him to nothing but ash. The Hyuga prodigy, a skilled fighter with incredible abilities, was now just a memory, a casualty of Naruto's godlike power. Kiba and Akamaru stood frozen in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. They couldn't even process the destruction. But Naruto's gaze shifted toward them, his eyes burning with cold malice. Kiba snarled and charged forward, his instincts telling him to fight back, to avenge his fallen teammate. But Naruto was too fast. With a single sweep of his hand, Naruto blasted Kiba and Akamaru with a surge of energy, sending them flying through the air. Kiba's body crashed into a nearby tree, unconscious before he hit the ground. Akamaru, too, was incapacitated, his body crushed under the weight of the attack. Naruto stood over them, surveying the damage with a look of complete indifference. He could feel the tremors of fear in the air, the terror emanating from the remaining participants. They all knew what had happened, they all knew they were nothing in his presence. He had destroyed two of the most skilled fighters in the exam with ease, and now, no one dared challenge him. The Chunin exam, which was meant to be a test of skill and determination, had become a mockery. For Naruto, it was a chance to prove his superiority, to show that he was beyond the reach of anyone. He didn't care about the title of Chunin. He didn't care about recognition. All he wanted was to see how far his power could stretch. And in that moment, it was clear, no one could stand in his way. The remaining participants were left in stunned silence, too frightened to even consider taking action. They could only watch as Naruto, the god of the shinobi world, moved forward, leaving nothing but destruction in his wake. The Chunin exam was over. And Naruto was already thinking about the next step in his conquest. Naruto stood atop the Hokage's monument, his cold gaze fixed on the village below. The place that had once rejected him, feared him, and treated him like a monster, this village, this symbol of the shinobi world, was now beneath him. He no longer cared for its politics, its leaders, or its people. They were nothing but ants, insignificant creatures who had dared to stand in the way of his ascension to power. At 12 years old, Naruto had outgrown the need for allies or enemies. He didn't need the Hokage's approval. He didn't need the villagers' respect. All he needed was his power, and with it, he could reshape the world as he saw fit. The villagers had no idea what was coming. The Hokage, Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Kakashi had all been too blind, too arrogant, to see the storm brewing in the young boy. They thought they could control him, manipulate him, or at least keep him in check. They were wrong. The village buzzed with the usual activity, unaware of the darkness looming overhead. Naruto's power had grown exponentially over the past few years, far beyond the capacity of any shinobi to comprehend. He could feel the pulse of energy within him, thrumming like an unstoppable force, waiting to be unleashed. And today, he would unleash it? Naruto took a deep breath and then, with a flick of his wrist, released a devastating wave of energy. The ground beneath him cracked open, and the air vibrated with the sheer force of his attack. The Hokage's monument, the symbol of the village's power and history, shattered in an instant, the faces of past Hokage crumbling to dust. He smirked. That was only the beginning. With another flick of his hand, Naruto sent a massive shockwave rippling through the village, tearing through buildings, crushing roads, and incinerating anyone unlucky enough to be in the blast radius. The ground trembled beneath his feet as Konoha's skyline fell apart, the once proud village crumbling into nothing. Screams filled the air as the villagers scattered in terror. They ran in every direction, but there was no escape. Naruto was everywhere, his energy sweeping across the land like a tidal wave. The buildings collapsed, the streets caught fire, and the once bustling village was reduced to a chaotic wasteland. Naruto watched it all with a detached amusement. This was no longer about revenge. It was about asserting his dominance. About showing everyone that he was a god among men. And the villagers, every single one of them, would bow to him or be wiped from existence. Tsunade was the first to react. As the Hokage, she had always been a symbol of strength, of unwavering will. But nothing could prepare her for the sheer destructive power Naruto wielded. She gathered her chakra, prepared for battle, but deep down, She knew it was futile. She could feel the weight of his power pressing down on her. The gap between them was too wide. Naruto. Tsunade called out, her voice strained. Stop this madness. You're destroying everything. Naruto glanced down at her, his expression cold and indifferent. Madness? No, Tsunade. This is the beginning of my reign. Before Tsunade could respond, Naruto raised his hand. A wave of energy shot from his palm, faster than anything she could perceive. Tsunade barely had time to raise a defense before the blast engulfed her. She was thrown back, crashing into the ground with enough force to send shock waves through the earth. Blood pooled beneath her, but Tsunade refused to stay down. She struggled to her feet, summoning the strength to fight back. But it was no use. Naruto had already moved, appearing in front of her in the blink of an eye. Without a word, he released another blast, this one more focused, more precise. Tsunade's body disintegrated in an instant, her cries lost in the explosion. Naruto didn't even flinch. He merely looked down at the spot where the Hokage had been, the power of her death sending a rush of adrenaline through him. Jiraiya and Kakashi appeared next, side by side. The two former mentors of Naruto, both legendary shinobi, knew the gravity of the situation. They had hoped, against hope, that there was still a way to reach the boy. But it was clear now Naruto had crossed a line from which there was no return. Naruto, stop. Jiraiya shouted, his voice thick with emotion. This isn't you. You're not a monster. Naruto tilted his head, the smallest hint of a smirk crossing his lips. Monster? You still think I need your approval, old man? You've all been weak. You were all weak to me. Kakashi stepped forward, his Sharingan activated, ready to defend his friend and former student. But even he knew that this was no longer a battle between equals. This was a god facing mere mortals. Jiraiya launched himself at Naruto, using a barrage of ninjutsu to try to overwhelm him. But Naruto effortlessly dodged and countered, his movements swift and precise. In the blink of an eye, he appeared behind Jiraiya, his hand already raised to release another blast. Jiraiya turned, trying to defend himself, but the blast hit him square in the chest. His body was sent flying, crashing into the remnants of a building. The force of the explosion shattered his bones, and Jiraiya lay motionless, his life snuffed out in an instant. Kakashi, filled with rage and desperation, charged forward, his Chidori crackling in his hand. Naruto! He yelled, hoping to reach him one last time. But it was hopeless. With a swift motion, Naruto brought his palm down, unleashing another wave of energy that obliterated Kakashi's body before he could even make contact. The two most powerful men in Naruto's life, his sensei, his protectors, were gone. They had failed to save him. They had failed to stop him. And now, they had been erased in an instant. With the deaths of the Hokage, Jiraiya, and Kakashi, the village was left in utter disarray. The remaining shinobi attempted to regroup, but their hearts were filled with dread. No one could stop Naruto. He was a force of nature, an unstoppable power that could wipe out Konoha without a second thought. Standing at the center of the destruction, Naruto raised his voice, his words carrying across the ruins of the village. This village, Konoha, will serve me, he declared. Or it will be erased. You are all beneath me. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can bow to me, and I will let you live. The villagers, bloodied and broken, were forced to watch as the boy who had once been a pariah, the boy who had been rejected and cast aside, now stood as their conqueror. They knew there was no hope. There was no hero to save them. The mighty Konoha, the heart of the shinobi world, had fallen. Naruto was the king now. And the world would bend to his will or face destruction. Konoha, once a bustling center of life, was now a broken shell of its former glory. The vibrant streets that had once echoed with laughter and chatter were now silent, save for the occasional cry of the weak or the distant sound of destruction. The village was a smoldering ruin, its once proud buildings reduced to rubble, its residents nothing more than shadows of their former selves. Naruto stood atop the wreckage, surveying the carnage below with detached amusement. His victory over Konoha had been swift, brutal, and complete. The shinobi who had once been his comrades, his mentors, his friends, now served him either as broken remnants of their former selves or as obedient tools, willing to do anything to avoid suffering his wrath. He had no need for allies. He had no need for loyalty. All he required was submission. The surviving shinobi, those too weak to resist or too frightened to fight back, were dragged to the center of the village. They knelt before him, trembling under the weight of his presence. No one spoke. No one dared to even breathe too loudly. They were in the presence of a god. Naruto's eyes scanned the fearful crowd before him, each individual so small and insignificant in his eyes. His hands were tucked casually behind his back as if he were observing a mere insect infestation rather than the broken shinobi of the village he had just conquered. His power surged with every passing moment, the aura of his FRIEZA-derived energy radiating outwards, pushing against the minds of everyone around him. Their bodies were no longer their own. Their wills bent to his, and they knew it. He did not have to speak a word. His mere presence commanded them to fall to their knees, to submit to the overwhelming power he now possessed. Fear had already gripped them, but now it was all-encompassing, suffocating them under the sheer pressure of his being. One shinobi, a young, trembling jonin, attempted to speak up, his voice wavering with defiance. We won't serve you. We won't be your slaves." Naruto's gaze locked onto the man, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. A flick of his hand was all it took. Without a word, the man's body was engulfed in a blast of energy, reduced to nothing more than a cloud of ash in a split second. There was no struggle. No resistance. Just annihilation. The remaining shinobi were paralyzed with fear. They knew they could not escape. They knew that their only option was to serve, to bend their wills to the power that now ruled over them. Naruto didn't need an army. He didn't need followers. He didn't need loyalty. All he required was obedience, and those who resisted would simply cease to exist. He was a god, and he would have his empire. The few who had the courage, if it could even be called courage, to rebel were quickly crushed, their resistance snuffed out before it could even begin. A stray group of rogue ninjas attempted to organize an uprising against him. Naruto knew they would fail before they even began. Their actions were predictable, weak beneath his notice. He let them come, just to make a point. When they attacked, they found themselves in the middle of a massacre. In seconds, their forces were decimated, their bodies shattered by the raw force of Naruto's power. Their screams were swallowed by the vast emptiness of the destroyed village, and by the time the last of them fell, Naruto stood there, unscathed, unbothered, his hands still behind his back. "Anyone else?" he asked, his voice calm, smooth, carrying the weight of his godlike authority. No one dared respond. No one dared move. Naruto's empire would be forged in blood and fear, and he knew it. The shinobi who remained were now his tools, his servants. The civilians who had once hated him now bowed before him, their eyes hollow with fear, their spirits crushed under the weight of his will. There was no room for rebellion. There was no room for disobedience. Anyone who dared to challenge him would find themselves eradicated. He did not have to force his will upon them. They came to him, crawling, begging for his mercy, for the privilege of serving him. Some tried to resist, to hold on to the remnants of their pride, but it was futile. Resistance only led to their demise. A single glance from Naruto, a single movement of his hand, was enough to erase them from existence. The survivors, those who still clung to life, were forced to rebuild Konoha in his image. They repaired the buildings, not to restore the village to its former glory, but to serve as symbols of his reign. The streets, once filled with vibrant life, would now be lined with statues and monuments to Naruto's godhood. No longer would the villagers look to their Hokage for protection. No longer would they look to their leaders for guidance. They would look to Naruto, and Naruto alone. The village's shinobi would become his personal army, their strength his to command. They would be his enforcers, his puppets, carrying out his every whim. There would be no rebellion, no resistance, no room for defiance. Those who were too weak to serve him were erased without a second thought. Those who showed any hint of rebellion were made examples of. In the years that followed, Naruto's empire grew stronger, spreading across the land like a plague. His influence reached every corner of the shinobi world. The other villages trembled at the mention of his name. They knew what would happen if they dared to oppose him. It wasn't a matter of military strength or strategy, it was a matter of sheer power. Naruto was untouchable. His reign was inevitable. As his power continued to grow, so did his cruelty. His empire was not built on diplomacy or alliance. It was built on fear. Fear of the god who had obliterated Konoha, who had wiped out entire nations, who had forged the world in his own image. The other villages, desperate to survive, would either bend a knee or face total destruction. Naruto had created a new world. A world where he was the undisputed ruler. The shinobi world had once prided itself on its balance of power. That balance was now broken, and there was no one left to challenge him. He had no equals. No rivals. Only those who served him, and those who had perished. He was not just a king. He was a god. And the world would bow before him. As Naruto looked out over his empire, standing on the ruins of Konoha, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He was unstoppable. Untouchable. The world was his to command, and there was no one left who could challenge him. His reign had only just begun. Naruto stood in the center of the wreckage that had once been Konoha, his power still radiating through the air, a palpable, almost visible force. The air crackled with residual energy from his recent victory, and the village, now nothing more than a broken monument to his power, lay at his feet. The villagers, those who still remained, cowered in his presence, their spirits broken. He was their god now. And as the ruler of Konoha, he had begun his conquest of the rest of the world. His eyes, cold and calculating, turned to the horizon, where other villages lay waiting, villages full of people who still clung to the illusion of defiance. But Naruto knew better. He was a god now, and there was no force on earth capable of standing against him. The hidden sand village was the first to feel his wrath. The cage of Suna, Gaara, the once feared and tragic Jinchuriki, was nothing compared to the force that Naruto had become. With FRIEZA's power flowing through his veins, Naruto could feel the world bending to his will. He no longer needed strategy, nor finesse. His mere presence was enough to destroy any resistance. Naruto arrived in Suna with a calm, almost amused demeanor. The village's defenses, once formidable, were now nothing more than paper against the overwhelming might of his energy. The moment he landed in the village's center, the ground trembled. The people screamed, but their voices were drowned out by the overwhelming aura of terror he exuded. The moment Gaara tried to confront him, Naruto merely smirked. "You are nothing," he said, his voice low and dangerous. With a flick of his wrist, a pulse of energy shot out, reducing Gaara's sand defenses to nothing and slamming the cage to the ground. Gaara struggled to rise, his chakra depleted, his will shattered, but Naruto only watched with cold amusement. The battle that had once been a life-or-death struggle for control of the village was over in seconds. "Foolish," Naruto murmured. "Did you really think you could stand against me?" Gaara's body was nothing but a ragdoll in Naruto's hands. The energy around Naruto flared with destructive force as he crushed Gaara's body in an instant. The sand that had once been Gaara's greatest ally now betrayed him, scattered and absorbed into Naruto's energy. It was a fitting end for a village that had once dared to challenge him. The rest of the village watched in horror as the death of their cage marked the end of their resistance. One by one, the Sen's defenders fell to his power, their attempts to fight futile. The people, once proud and defiant, fell to their knees, too terrified to even look at Naruto as he strode through their shattered city, claiming it as his own. "Swear your allegiance," Naruto ordered the remaining villagers, his voice carrying across the ruined landscape. The few who dared raise their heads were quickly crushed beneath the weight of his will, their lives snuffed out with the slightest movement of his hand. The rest bent their heads in submission, pledging their fealty to the god who now ruled over them. Naruto didn't care. They were tools, nothing more. Their loyalty meant nothing. Their survival depended on how well they served him. Next, Naruto turned his attention to the hidden stone village Iwa. Known for its massive military strength and the brutal tactics of its leaders, Iwa had always been a threat to the other villages. But to Naruto, it was another obstacle to crush. He arrived without warning, his power surging with every step as he crushed the stone beneath his feet. The earth itself seemed to tremble in his wake, and the villagers who saw him approach immediately scattered in fear. The Tsuchikage, Oniki, an elderly man with vast experience and strength, tried to stand against Naruto. With the might of FRIEZA's power coursing through his body, Naruto felt no challenge from the ancient cage. He wasn't a threat, he was a relic of the past, an insignificant speck before the destructive force that was Naruto. Oniki's words, heavy with the pride of a fallen generation, were lost in the wind. Before the Tsuchikage could even formulate a plan, Naruto struck. A blast of energy decimated Iwa's defensive barriers, and the cage was left defenseless. "I should have known better than to think anyone from this village could stand against me," Naruto said with a smile as he raised his hand. With a flick of his wrist, Oniki's body was consumed by a powerful energy surge, his body crushed beneath the weight of Naruto's overwhelming force. The villagers, already broken by the loss of their cage, fell silent. The surviving shinobi attempted to organize, but their efforts were futile. The earth cracked and split open, swallowing the remnants of their defenses. One by one, the shinobi fell before him, reduced to dust under his godlike power. The earth itself seemed to bend to his will as he unleashed devastating waves of energy, turning the once proud village into a desolate wasteland. "Iwa is no more," Naruto declared, standing amidst the wreckage of the village, his eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent light. The few survivors, too terrified to resist, swore their allegiance to him, their pride broken along with their village. The hidden cloud village, Kyumo, was the next to fall. Known for its elite shinobi and the powerful Raikage, Kyumo was a force to be reckoned with. But Naruto was no longer concerned with strength, he was a force of nature, a god with no equal. His mere presence sent shockwaves through the hidden cloud's defenses. The Raikage, a man known for his immense physical strength and lightning-fast reflexes, attempted to challenge Naruto in a battle for supremacy. But as the Raikage charged at him, Naruto merely flicked his fingers, sending a pulse of destructive energy that completely obliterated the ground beneath Kyumo's elite forces. The Raikage tried to fight back, but Naruto only laughed. "You think you can fight a god?" he mocked, watching as the Raikage's attacks were effortlessly deflected. With another flick of his wrist, the Raikage was disintegrated, reduced to nothing more than a pile of ash in the wind. The survivors, those who had dared to fight, quickly realized the futility of resistance. Their pride was shattered, their wills broken. Naruto stood tall as the remnants of Kyumo fell to their knees. The few who remained swore allegiance to him without hesitation, their former leaders erased from existence. The world was his. The shinobi world was his to command. Finally, Naruto turned his sights to the hidden mist village, one of the most brutal and ruthless of all the villages. Known for its bloodthirsty ninja and the infamous bloodlines that flowed through its veins, the mist village was feared across the shinobi world. But in the face of Naruto's overwhelming power, the mist was nothing. The Mizukage, a young and fierce leader, attempted to stand her ground. But it was clear that she was outclassed. Her water-based jutsu was nothing in comparison to the destructive power Naruto wielded. With a flick of his wrist, Naruto shattered her defenses, sending her flying through the air before landing with a sickening thud. The remnants of the Mist's forces attempted to fight, but it was clear they were outmatched. One by one, they fell, their bodies reduced to nothing by Naruto's destructive energy. There was no resistance. There was no fight. Just utter annihilation. Naruto had done what no other had ever dared. He had brought the shinobi world to its knees. With Konoha at his feet and the other villages destroyed or bending to his will, Naruto was the supreme ruler of the world. No one could challenge him. No one could stand against him. His power was absolute. As the sun set over the ruined remains of the hidden villages, Naruto stood atop the ruins of what had once been the world's most powerful nations. His empire stretched across the continent, and there was no one left who could challenge him. He was no longer just a man. He was a god. And the world would bow before him, or be destroyed in his wake. After Naruto has decimated all opposition and solidified his dominance over the shinobi world, the world finds itself in a state of fearful compliance. No one dares to challenge his rule, for his power is beyond measure. He has the ability to control nations, and everyone in his empire knows that one slip, one hint of defiance, would lead to annihilation. Naruto rules with a clear, unyielding will. He doesn't need to kill to maintain control, for his presence alone is enough to induce compliance. He has transformed the shinobi world into an empire built on loyalty and subservience, not through outright cruelty but through his sheer superiority. Naruto's leadership is cold, precise, and methodical. He surrounds himself with those who prove their loyalty. Generals, advisors, and lieutenants who once were enemies or rivals are now his closest allies. Through strategic alliances and an iron fist, he has built a hierarchy where no one dares to question his authority. Naruto doesn't rule with love or affection, he rules with respect, fear, and unwavering strength. His mind is always calculating, always a few steps ahead of anyone who might try to undermine his reign. When he addresses his subjects, his words are measured, always invoking an air of inevitable dominance. He's learned the value of keeping the masses in line not through torture or fear of death, but through the certainty that to challenge him is to invite ruin. Naruto, now a godlike figure, is aware of his immense appeal. Women from all corners of the world are drawn to his power, and he uses this to further solidify his position. He surrounds himself with women who are intelligent, capable, and loyal, knowing that they will use their influence to carry out his orders. Rather than forcing anyone into submission, Naruto has the power to make alliances through mutual respect, offering women a chance to stand by his side as respected members of his court. These women become his closest confidants, advisors, and even generals in his empire, using their wisdom and influence to help him maintain control over his vast territories. He makes sure that those who serve him are respected for their skills and contributions. Women, especially, gain power through their proximity to him, not through submission, but through strategic partnership. Naruto's empire thrives on this mutually beneficial power structure, where loyalty, intelligence, and strength are valued above all else. As the supreme ruler of the shinobi world, Naruto aims to rebuild and redefine the society he now controls. He implements reforms that ensure peace and stability across the continent. He creates a new shinobi code, one that demands complete loyalty to the empire and strict discipline from his subjects. He establishes schools and academies to train the next generation of shinobi, ensuring that they are loyal to the empire first and foremost. These academies focus not only on combat skills but on loyalty, strategy, and mental fortitude. Naruto wants to build a society where the strongest and the most capable thrive, and everyone has their place within the empire. However, Naruto does not tolerate any form of betrayal. Any rebellion or hint of disloyalty is met with swift and decisive punishment, striking fear into the hearts of those who might consider opposing him. But his justice is fair. He values order above all else and will only act when necessary. His empire is built on balance, ensuring that everyone knows their role. Despite the immense power at his disposal, Naruto begins to feel the weight of leadership. He's constantly reminded of the isolation that comes with ruling an empire. Though surrounded by allies and followers, he is truly alone in his position. There are no true equals, no one to confide in. The once carefree Naruto is now burdened with the responsibilities of an emperor. His moments of vulnerability are few and fleeting. In the quiet moments of reflection, he wonders if the price of absolute power was worth the sacrifice of his humanity. But he never shows this side to anyone. To his subordinates and those who depend on him, he remains the perfect leader, strong, unyielding, and calculating. Naruto's empire is vast, and maintaining control requires constant vigilance. He has a network of spies, informants, and agents working tirelessly to ensure that no one dares to undermine his rule. The slightest whisper of rebellion is snuffed out before it can grow into anything more. To keep his empire from crumbling, Naruto occasionally makes personal visits to the provinces under his control. These visits are not just for show, they are a reminder to his subjects of his power. He does not seek to rule with an iron fist constantly, but he makes sure that when he does intervene, it is with unmatched force and precision. As time goes on, Naruto's once boundless hunger for power begins to shift. While he maintains his grip on the world, the weight of his empire slowly begins to wear on him. He begins to wonder if there is more to life than just control. He sees the world around him, filled with people who worship him, and yet, in the depths of his mind, he feels a void. Naruto no longer desires to destroy or dominate. Instead, he contemplates the true meaning of his existence. Is he just a tool for peace and order, or is there something deeper to his power? The struggle within him intensifies, and though he remains the undisputed ruler of the shinobi world, the shadow of doubt begins to creep into his thoughts. Naruto's reign is unchallenged, and his power is absolute. However, his reign comes with a price: his humanity. He is a ruler who has conquered everything but himself. As he looks over his empire, Naruto realizes that while his empire is prosperous and his enemies vanquished, he is still alone in the end. But despite these internal struggles, he knows one thing for certain: the world will never again be the same. And under his rule, the shinobi world will thrive in a new age of order and dominance. His legacy will be remembered for generations, not just as a conqueror, but as the god who shaped the future of the shinobi world. By the age of 16, Naruto's power is beyond anything the world has ever seen. The once chaotic, fragmented shinobi world now bends to his will, the result of years of destruction and strategic manipulation. His strength, born from the deadly combination of his inherited abilities, the essence of FRIEZA, and his unrelenting pursuit of domination, has placed him at the apex of power. His rule is not just feared but accepted. His reputation precedes him, the invincible god who wields power with unmatched precision. The villages that once stood as rivals now lie in ruins, their leaders vanquished or cowed into servitude. The hidden villages, once symbols of resistance, have been reduced to nothing but tools in his grand scheme. Naruto's control over the shinobi world is absolute, and everyone knows it. His presence alone instills fear, a force of nature that no one can defy. With a single thought, he can level entire villages or strike down any who dare challenge him. Despite the power he commands, his rule is not simply built on fear, it's the result of calculated and masterful manipulation. Naruto has carefully molded the world to suit his desires, leaving no room for rebellion. The other nations, once home to proud shinobi, are now mere extensions of his will. The Kage who once stood as symbols of hope and defiance have either been killed or forced to submit to his authority. The few remaining resistant factions are no more than a fleeting memory, crushed under the weight of his reign. As Naruto continues to assert his dominance, he begins to feel the psychological toll of absolute control. At first, it was thrilling crushing his enemies, securing his place as the supreme ruler. But as the years pass, something begins to shift. What was once a world full of challenges, of rivalries and ambition, has now become monotonous. The thrill of conquest fades, leaving behind a cold, empty void. Naruto has everything, yet nothing feels satisfying. The world is his, but there is no one left to challenge him. His friends, his comrades, those he once fought alongside, are now either beneath him or erased from existence. The loneliness that comes with absolute power is a constant companion, and Naruto finds himself pondering his purpose. He no longer seeks to prove himself to others, his only remaining challenge is the one within. The weight of ruling an empire becomes apparent. Despite his immense power, Naruto wonders if it was worth it, if the endless struggle for dominance and control has led him to the emptiness he now feels. But even in the state of existential reflection, he knows there is no turning back. To relinquish his control would be to invite chaos, and chaos is something he cannot allow. The last pockets of resistance, small factions that have survived by hiding in the shadows, are all that remain of the world's defiance. But these last groups are no match for Naruto's overwhelming might. His forces are vast, and his intelligence, sharp as ever, allows him to strike at any remaining opposition with precision. The final remnants of the shinobi world's freedom are systematically dismantled. Naruto uses his strategic genius to eliminate any potential threats before they even have a chance to rise. Entire nations fall at his command, not because of mindless destruction, but because of his ability to predict every move of his enemies. His enemies fight with desperation, but they are no match for his cold, calculating nature. The final battle, when it comes, is swift and decisive. Naruto doesn't need to lift a finger in the traditional sense. His presence alone, his aura of dominance, is enough to break the spirit of any who dare oppose him. When the last pockets of resistance fall, he knows the world is finally his. With all resistance extinguished, Naruto finally stands alone atop the world he has conquered. His empire is vast, stretching across every land, from the hidden leaf to the farthest reaches of the shinobi continent. The people, once divided and rebellious, now bend to his will. There is no more fighting, no more wars, only silence in his wake. Yet even as he surveys the empire he has created, a part of him wonders about the world that could have been. Would things have turned out differently if he had not sought power with such fervor? But such thoughts are fleeting. His rule is absolute, and the cost of his choices has already been paid. The shinobi world, once divided by its villages, is now united under one ruler, Naruto Uzumaki. He sits at the pinnacle, not as a hero, but as a god, untouchable, irreplaceable. But even as the world bends to his will, Naruto knows that nothing in life is ever truly permanent. His reign, like all things, will one day come to an end. But for now, the world is his, and he is the unchallenged ruler of all. Now that he has eliminated all resistance, Naruto begins to reshape the world. The old systems of the hidden villages and their fractured alliances are no more. Instead, he creates a new order, one where the strongest lead, and the weak are subjugated. He ensures that his empire remains stable by surrounding himself with those who are loyal to him, not just in allegiance, but in mind and spirit. Naruto rules with a cold, unrelenting hand, but he is not a tyrant in the traditional sense. He rewards those who prove themselves capable, elevating them within his empire. Loyalty and strength are the pillars of his new world, and anyone who falls short is erased from the equation. There is no place for weakness in his empire, and the world quickly adapts to his vision. While there are no more open rebellions, whispers of discontent still linger in the shadows. But Naruto's spies are everywhere, and those who dare to challenge him are quickly silenced. He keeps a tight grip on his power, ensuring that no one dares defy him. His empire is a well-oiled machine, one that runs with ruthless efficiency. Despite the world at his feet, Naruto cannot escape the internal conflict that gnaws at him. He has everything, but what has it cost him? His humanity, his friendships, His past, all of it has been sacrificed for this power. The world is his, but in his quiet moments, he wonders if it was all worth it. He has no equals, no friends to confide in, only subordinates and loyal followers. And yet, even as he contemplates the cost of his rule, Naruto knows he is a force beyond comprehension. He is no longer the boy who sought acceptance, he is a god among mortals, untouchable and beyond reproach. The question now is not whether he will rule, but for how long he will continue to bear the burden of absolute power. For in a world where there are no challenges, no equals, power itself can become a prison. Naruto has achieved what no one before him could, the unification of the shinobi world under his rule. His power is absolute, and he is feared and respected by all. But with this power comes the realization that in his pursuit of godhood, he has lost much, perhaps even himself. The reign of Naruto Uzumaki is unparalleled, but the true cost of his empire is still to be understood. Though he may sit on the throne of the world, Naruto now faces the greatest challenge of all, understanding the true meaning of his existence in a world that he has reshaped in his own image.